infrastructure that helps big brands enter the space, to me, the market size for this is just huge. I think like in the future, all of these brands will have their Web3 presence. And if you can insert yourself somewhere in that space, wherever that niche could be and what you're really good at, I think that that's going to be a very, very, very big market in the future.
The Collectours.
Welcome back to The Collectours, and we're super thrilled to have yet another big brain from the NFT, digital collectible, everything ecosystem with us today. Very happy to be hosting Teng from Delphi, an NFT luminary and prolific writer. Thanks for joining us on The Collectours.
Hey guys, hey Todd, nice to meet you. So glad to be here. Excited to discuss all things about NFTs.
G'day, Teng. Very excited to have you. I've been doing a deep dive on you. And for those that are not familiar with you and maybe even Delphi, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little bit of a background on you, maybe your prior life to the sort of NFT Web3 space and how you got to where you are and how you sort of folded into Delphi. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say I got into crypto. I was probably from the class of 2017. That was when I first encountered Bitcoin and Ethereum. And during that time, I was working in a tech startup. There was really a healthcare data analytics company that myself and another partner founded. And I was working there for the last 6 or 7 years before entering Web3. So, I mean, when I first got to know about like crypto, I think a lot of it was very much speculative. Like you just see number go up, and it was interesting to me. And then I think when the whole bear market came about, like 2018, 2019, I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. But I think in the early 2020s, I think it was a couple of friends who started to pull me in again. I thought it was really interesting, like what was going on. I started going down that rabbit hole, reading up a lot about like blockchains, crypto, Ethereum especially caught my eye, and I was very fascinated about what they could do. So and so basically it was just doing stuff, like went through the whole sort of like DeFi summer period. But I think what really caught my eye was what went on like with NFTs. So I wouldn't say I was like super early in the NFT sort of like space, but I think I bought my first NFT probably in the later part of like 2020, and it was basically one of those like pixelated derivative type of collections that eventually sort of like went to zero. But when I bought it, I thought like, wow, this was amazing. Like I suddenly felt like a certain affinity, a certain like urge to want to buy more of these sort of like things. And that was like, it was sort of like, what was it? I think it was like a pixelated ape collection that they would do like, they would make these like graphics of various celebrities like Kanye West, Donald Trump or so. And I thought it was just really funny and interesting. And I think that really led me to explore this sort of like NFT space. And so today I work full-time in a company called Delphi Digital. I head up our NFT research at Delphi. And just very briefly, for those not familiar, I think Delphi, one of our core business is basically research. We serve professional investors, and we basically try to identify early trends in the Web3 space across like infrastructure, finance, NFTs, gaming, and metaverse. And I spend most of my time on the NFTs and the metaverse side of things.
Awesome. Yeah, Delphi is known for going deep on pretty much everything that gets built in the Web3 space, and definitely have put their money where their mouth is. And a lot of occasions, they also, I know, have this investment arm. But when it comes to the research, I think it's best in class. And I've been reading some of your independent writing as well. I think we looked at your Substack. We looked at some of the things that you've been touching on. There's a lot of really great frameworks, I think, that you introduced. And one of those, the one we're going to start with today anyways, is belief rates. And, you know, now we're in this no longer zero interest rate environment, and now we're in this bear market. This is impacting our ability to believe, I guess, in this cycle. So maybe explain to our audience, what is a belief rate in your definition, and how is that impacting like sector by sector the NFT space right now?
Yeah, for sure. So I think at a very high level, like how I think about like belief rates is really like um, how much, how much we are willing to sort of like discount the future development of something, right? So basically, if we think about like a tech startup, basically every startup starts from the beginning and they have basically a very grand vision that they want to achieve, and they have all these different sort of like roadmap items around it. And the belief rate is really about the sentiment, right? And the investor environment, like how much do investors believe that a particular startup, a particular team, a particular founder is going to be able to achieve all the sort of like roadmap items that they have sort of like planned out and be able to sort of like achieve the vision that he set out. So I think like typically in for example, like maybe a year or year and a half ago, when we were in much more bullish conditions where everything was just going up, I would say you can think of the belief rates as very high. Like everything that we saw, every time a project will release a new piece of news saying that we're doing something really cool, basically the price of that would sort of like go up, right? And basically everyone sort of like believes that all of these things will come to fruition. And then we saw the total opposite happen last year when we had the bear market, when Terra Luna crashed, when FTX collapsed, and suddenly I think everyone became risk averse, right? And no one wanted to invest in anything at all. And basically investors felt like everything that people or startups were trying to create was basically useless. It's not going to have users. It's not going to work. So I think we were in that sort of like environment for quite a bit. And I think even today, I think there has been a little bit of a jolt of positivity since the beginning of this year. But we're still in a bit of environment where people tend to be pretty skeptical about what the future is going to be like. And I think that has a very big impact on NFTs in particular, because if you think about like many of these sort of like NFT projects, if we say the Bored Ape ecosystem, for example, or say Azukis or Doodles, what I've come to realize is that these aren't just sort of like profile pictures, right? They aren't just like I buy them, I use them as my profile pic on Twitter, and that's about it. Like these are actually legitimate companies that actually have raised quite a lot of funds. Like Yuga Labs raised like 400 million over the last 1 or 2 years, and they do have to deliver a real sort of like working product that's there. And basically, what we saw is that a lot of these like PFP prices fell quite a lot over the last year or so, because like people just didn't believe that many of these like PFPs are sort of like going to be achieve their sort of like objectives, right? Which a lot of it is just going to become a mainstream game or a mainstream brand. And I still think like today is still challenging. I think like many of these PFPs aren't probably going to sort of like make it, but it's really interesting to see the sentiment and how that affects the prices on it. And what I found particularly interesting, and that's what I sort of like wrote a little bit about, was that in the bear market, actually generative art actually did really well, like compared to many of these other sectors that was there. We look at, say, the Chromie Squiggles as, let's say, the flagship collection that represents like generative art as a whole. In fact, like at least on the ETH basis, like it hit like all-time highs in the later part of last year. And my thesis was really that with art, there is no roadmap, right? There is once it's out in this world, there's nothing else that needs to be built to give that value. We collect it because we like it. We think it's beautiful. We think the artist is doing great things, and it's going to be very, it's going to be, I mean, we just want to see what other interesting things he or she is going to sort of like create in the future. And I think that's what led to sort of like art being, holding up relatively well, I would say, even in the sort of like bear market, because there's really nothing to believe, there's nothing to discount over a period of time. So I thought that was a really interesting sort of like observation.
It's interesting. It's interesting to look at just what people care about, just in terms of their time horizons too. In a bull market, everybody's time horizon seems to be maybe weeks, maybe days, maybe hours. And then in a bear market, when you start considering these multi-year, maybe even multi-decade timelines, the same thing seems to happen that happens in the traditional art world, which is, instead of sort of a hit maker's market like gaming, it is more of like a Picasso, a Monet, why is this going to hold value over time? What was the cultural relevance of this work? So I guess it makes sense, because not only are people sort of pulling back that speculative mindset and becoming more risk averse, they're also thinking very long term. Like, if I'm going to buy anything at all, gosh, I hope it's still got value in like 10 years time. Do you think that's what's driving so much demand for maybe those like OG ETH collections in particular?
Yeah, I think 100%. Like I think the group of people that are collecting all of these like things like art, they definitely are a very different breed of people who are, say, collecting all these other more um, PFP type collections. Because I think people who are collecting art, firstly, I think they're fairly affluent and wealthy. They probably made it, like, just by being early in crypto, by going through DeFi summer or so, and they're willing to buy and hold and just not care about it. And I think that's one interesting thing that we sort of noted. And I think your point on the time frames, I think that's super interesting, because like I'm in some of these like Discord groups, and I see people sort of like shilling stuff and making calls on like certain NFT collections that they feel is going to do well in the future. And sometimes they say like, okay, this is a long-term hold. And when they say long-term hold, they say that, oh, you should hold it for the next 3 to 4 weeks or so. And I mean, it's just really, it's just very interesting to see that. I think most people have a very short-term mindset in the NFT sort of like space. Whereas I think the people who are collecting all of these like artworks, especially I would say the more like the one-of-one sort of like artworks, I think these people have that very long-term mindset in mind, and they are accumulating, assuming that these things are going to accrue a lot of cultural value in, say, 5 or 10 years or so.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to the art and some of these other blue chip NFTs, because I think there's an evolved conversation to go there. But just to take a little side note, looking at sort of the overall state of the market, I think what's interesting now, obviously, now that we're sort of evolving very rapidly into, let's call it NFT 2.0, whatever that's going to be, and the state of play and the fact that volumes overall are down, looking at marketplaces, and specifically, I was looking through your thread, obviously the one that we're talking about today is sort of the whole Blur Opensea, and then sort of the royalties. And I think you had a very interesting comment on, actually, this is more of a macro trend, and what's your view on that, and where do you think we're going to go from here?
Yeah, I would say that I think like the whole NFT marketplace landscape has been really messy. I think these last 6 months or so, like I've been like full time in this space, and even I find it like really difficult to sort of like keep track of what's going on. And the reason is because like marketplaces are just, I mean, they're locked in a very heated sort of like competitive game. We have Looks Rare. I mean, Looks Rare came on to challenge Opensea, but I mean, since then it's sort of like fallen behind quite a bit. But I think the flavor of these last 3 to 4 months has really been Blur versus Opensea, and we can see that every time like one party does something, the other party sort of like responds accordingly. Just like recently, what was pretty shocking to me was like how Opensea decided to just drop all its fees, go to zero in terms of like marketplace fees, and that's really definitely clearly in response to Blur capturing a fair bit of its market volume. And Blur has been able to do that because really it just has just tried to make fees as low as possible by having no fees at all in its marketplace and charging like very minimal sort of like creator royalties also. So I think like at a very high level, I think what's interesting is that I think we're going to see like it's not going to be one big platform that's just going to be a winner takes all sort of like marketplace. That's what I feel. I feel like there are going to be multiple different marketplaces that serve very different sort of like niches. A few reasons for this. One is the NFT space. I think like all of us are here is because we believe, right? We believe that NFTs are such amazing, versatile technology primitives that can be used in all different industries in the future. And the market for NFTs is just going to expand like multiple fold over the next like 5-10 years or so. And there'll be so many interesting and different use cases for it. So we're going to see like different kinds of marketplace catered to very different sort of like verticals. And that's really my sort of like mental framework as I think about this. Like the marketplaces are going to start to become a lot more verticalized. And I think we're already seeing this with what happened with Blur. Blur from the very beginning is stated very clearly that it's targeted at professional traders, pro traders, right? That's the market, that's the users that it wants to capture. It doesn't really want to focus on creators. It doesn't want to really focus on retail people, but it wants to make the best tools for traders to really, basically have the best experience on that. And I think they've done a really good job on that. And most people who trade NFTs, buy or sell them on a regular basis, they would definitely prefer to use Blur over Opensea. But on the other hand, I think if you look at what Opensea is doing, Opensea has a very strong, I would say, like brand name among retail, right? If you talk to somebody who's very much a sort of like casual NFT collector, who say buys 1 or 2 NFTs when he sees something that is interesting to him but doesn't follow the market very closely, all the people I talk to, they have never heard of Blur. They just go to Opensea, they just go to what they need to buy and they just buy it, right? So I think like there are going to be all of these different sort of like parts of the market that's going to be captured by different kinds of marketplaces that have built their product to be really catered to these different audiences. And then I think the other thing that is going to be also very interesting, I think, is really in terms of like various subsectors of NFTs. Like gaming is probably going to have its own either an aggregator or a thematic sort of like marketplace that's going to do that. I think virtual lands, if they become a big thing, they're also going to have their own kinds of marketplaces. I think arts and music will also have their own sort of like community sort of like focus marketplaces. And that's sort of like my framework of how the space will evolve as of right now.
Let me talk to you about that, because you wrote about this idea of the great unbundling of NFT marketplaces. But as we know, these cycles tend to come also with rebundlings, things that get unbundled, then get repackaged. I remember dealing with it, like I did some MBA research on this, and it was like sort of the unbundling of content distribution. And then I remember summer of 2015, I think it was the launch of like Pluto TV, where it was like suddenly they were rebundling all these streaming services into a single streaming service. But at the time, but right before that, the whole narrative was every single cable channel is going to have their own streaming platform. You know, it was inevitable that then it would get rebundled again. So it's unbundling, it's rebundling, etc. When I was reading about what you were writing about this, there was another phrase that stuck out to me. I don't think it was you were quoting somebody else in this, but this idea of experiences that make users meaningfully happier on the marketplace. And I don't think that that's just like a marketplace specific term. I think this kind of goes for any platform where you're connecting users with each other. So at Stashh, like our stated mission is where collectors and creators connect. It's a marketplace, but it's also a social platform. You know, we care a lot about how those connections get made. And that is our KPI, meaningfully happier experiences for both creators and for collectors. You could argue that unbundling these platforms leads to meaningfully happier experiences because you're targeting these verticals a lot more concretely. But you could also argue that rebundling these experiences and creating a larger social marketplace where more people are discovering more things and more projects, but also each other as collectors, maybe creating the largest commons would create the most meaningfully happy experience. So how much of this is really just about like, you know, it has to be vertical specific because we're talking about just better products, and how much of it is that it really just always comes down to the emotional experience, either for the creator or for the collector?
Yeah, that's a fantastic like question. Like, yeah, no, I totally agree in the sense that if you are sort of like building a new marketplace like today, I mean, you definitely need to start by finding who your initial audience is, and you just have to, before you even think about trying to grow your say merchandise volume or trying to grow the number of users. You just need to make sure that your initial set of users are happy enough with what you're trying to do. Because if you're not able to even sort of like do that, not able to bring your users on that emotional journey that you sort of like that you mentioned and you described, I think your marketplace is never going to sort of like succeed in the future. And I think the point that you brought out about the whole bundling, unbundling, I think that also makes sense, because like I think the evolution of how these marketplaces will be is that it's not a one-way street, right? It's not like we have Opensea, we have Bair, and then 3 years later we just have everything in all these different verticals. I think it's going to be that sort of like evolution. There's going to be a push and pull, because today most of the marketplaces and most of the volume is centered around these like centralized, generalized marketplaces. I think it's more natural to start to see a shift towards like these vertical marketplaces as new startups try to build around this. But there will also come a point in time where some of these startups actually succeed, and they are, say, in a particular vertical, and they decide they want to expand to a few more verticals and start to bring and use their products in all these other verticals as well. And I think they will try and attempt to do so. So I think what will happen is that we will have this sort of like push and pull and this sort of like thing evolve. But I think over the long term, like if we were to zoom out, 20, 30 years down the road, I personally think it's that every single like subsector that we call like in NFTs today, be it gaming, be it music, be it art, it's just going to be such a huge industry. It's going to be like $1 trillion industry, each of these single subsectors, that it's really impossible for like a single company or a single product to really own all of that and be sort of like the truly dominant player in that. So that's sort of like a little bit of what I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's happening so fast. And just touching on 2 points, just to bring them together, going back sort of the whole Blur narrative and how they've been really focusing on the pro traders. And what you've mentioned, and I've heard others mention, and I think it's rapidly changing, is this idea of NFT DeFi. And I don't know if it's a term yet, but I thought I sort of combine them. Are we going to call it NeFi? So this idea of now we have an entire emerging asset class that's exploding underneath our in front of our eyes, and just making reference point to another sort of pundit out there, Raoul Paul, who just recently put out this sort of ultimate guide to NFTs. I don't know if you've seen this, but this idea that if you're investing in NFTs, you could actually get a double upside, because one, it's priced in Ethereum, and then whatever value accrual it gets, for the next bull. But maybe you can touch on this sort of new, I guess, we're basically going into we're applying DeFi to a new asset class and sort of the new products that are coming to market for that. I'd love to. I mean, I know you went through it in detail on some of your threads. I'd love for you maybe to talk through some of these things and what the potential upside and opportunities coming downstream from us.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I think like the financialization of NFTs is a really interesting and going to be a really hot sort of like trend and topic in the coming months or so. And it's very funny because I mean a lot of people have called it NeFi, but it's just never really struck. I feel like we just need to find a better term to do that. I think NFT-fi also doesn't really sound good. So maybe we'll find something along that. But I think what's really interesting is that NFTs, like, it is a very young industry, right? If you think about it, I think it's only really caught traction in the last 2 years or so. So it's so young, it's very nascent, and there are a lot of inefficiencies in the NFT markets. If you were around in, say, the early 2021s, there were just so many ways you can potentially, I guess, like, capture the upside from some of these NFTs. Like, information flowed so slowly. There were very few places that you could actually trade these NFTs. Like, sometimes some of these deals would just go over the counter. And so I think what we're seeing and what NFT finance is doing is really making all of these like markets a lot more efficient. I think it's a natural evolution as an asset class like NFTs start to mature and start to develop and start to become something that people truly think of as a true like asset class. I think that whole financialization narrative will come in. And I think it's a good thing. Like a lot of people sometimes they tell me that, okay, NFTs, if you're going to start to do all these like financial stuff on it, that's not what NFTs are meant to do, right? NFTs are supposed to be fun and all of that stuff. But I think like what the financialization is going to do is it's going to bring in a new group of people into the space. It's going to bring in people who are more familiar with finance, who are more interested in finance, who have this sort of like skill sets and expertise to be able to build interesting products around NFTs. And I think that would draw in a lot more capital, it draw in a lot more liquidity into these markets. And I think the case in point is just really what happened with Blur over the last 1 or 2 months, because they launched these bidding pools that allows people to sort of like pool their ETH and start to make bids on various collections. Basically, the liquidity for NFTs has just suddenly shot up a lot. It's made the markets a lot more efficient on that side. So we are in the very, very early days of NFT finance. Like the only real tools that people are probably using right now are these like automated market makers, as an alternative to exchanges. And the other thing is really about just borrowing using your NFTs as a collateral. And I think that took off a little bit over the course of 2022, where you can basically pledge your Bored Ape and basically take out a loan of maybe like 30 to 40% of the value of that NFT. So, but I think these are really very early sort of like primitives in the finance space. And if we've seen what has been built up in DeFi so far, there's a lot more. There are all these like pricing tools, there are derivatives, there are a lot more, I would say, sophisticated financial instruments that make use of NFTs in sort of like different ways. And I think these are startups that have already been starting to build their products. They are starting to launch their, I guess, like beta versions of their products through the course of this year. I think many of them will also use a token to either bootstrap their initial set of users. And so I do think we're actually going to see a little bit of this, maybe a little bit of like a deja vu of this DeFi summer sort of like period starting to play out again in NFT finance as all these different like companies come on board. And I think the Blur token has sort of like also given a little bit of a boost to this sort of like idea and thesis.
It's fascinating to kind of watch these worlds intersect. It's also fascinating because one of my past lives, I was a derivatives market maker for a number of years, and to see these sort of illiquid markets forming around these illiquid products and then suddenly be gaining liquidity, it's just weird because, we talk a lot about all these different NFT collections and things like that. We talk about, how should you price these? How should they gain liquidity? Some of these blue chip collections tend to trade like blue chip stocks, very deep order pools, because they know that there's some sort of underlying current of demand. But a lot of these long tail NFTs or newer NFTs, they trade like options markets. They're either going to be worth absolutely zero or a crap ton. And getting liquidity for illiquid markets like that, getting liquidity for an options market is really hard. Most people are going to lose a hell of a lot of money. That's why that industry professionalized in like the 80s and 90s. This options market making industry, it professionalized, and there was so much money to be made at those points. But it was also very, very dangerous because they were very poorly understood markets to a large extent as well. This kind of brings me to another question that I have, because we're talking now also about like tools for existing professional traders, and most of those professional traders are coming from ETH. They're coming from the world where the most valuable NFTs are there. The most liquidity is there in DeFi, like it's still based on ETH. That's where all the stable coins live. That's where all these protocols live natively. And, these ETH blue chip collections get and retain the most value, but they're also huge barriers to entry potentially for new users because it's so expensive or because it's so whale driven. So there's, again, this sort of balance between the OG money, the new players, things like that. And maybe there's some other L1s like Polygon or Solana or Tezos that are approaching things kind of differently. So let's talk about layer ones for a second beyond Ethereum. You know, I have a kind of a two-parter here. First of all, does the layer one matter? How much does it matter what layer one your NFT is deployed on? And to the extent that it does matter, what do you think the odds are that we're going to see dominant layer ones beyond ETH? And if they are dominant, are they dominant across the whole market, or like we talked about, are they more verticalized? Are they or are L1s going to become as verticalized as you see the marketplaces themselves becoming?
Yeah, no, that's a great place to sort of like dive into, for sure. Yeah, so I think going back to the first question is like, on L1s, right? I think my view is that, and my hopes is, say if we zoom out and we fast forward to say like 20, 30 years down the road, I think it's not going to matter in terms of like which L1 you are, because the ideal situation is that like people, when they interact with NFTs, they're not going to, they don't even have to bother, they don't need to know. We have all these tools that be able to automatically detect and do all of that. But the reality is that in the short term, like in the next couple of years, I think it's going to make a very big difference. And I think, if you are a creator, if you are a founder, and you are building an NFT project, be it NFT infrastructure, or you want to launch an NFT collection, I think picking the L1 is actually probably one of the biggest and most important decisions that you are probably going to make right now. I think a couple of interesting things that I've really observed is that I think every L1 has a very different sort of like culture, NFT culture at least. Like if we think about like what's going on in Ethereum is really dominated by a lot of, I would say, NFT whales. These are people, very big collectors. They bought into many of these collections, both art and PFPs, at a very early stage, and they just made so much money out of it. A lot of them are just holding onto these collections. They're not selling any of it. So ETH is still, I mean, Ethereum is still dominated by, it still has the biggest amount of liquidity by far among all the sort of like NFT chains. But the challenge with Ethereum is that it's very difficult. There's not a lot that you can do with your NFTs on Ethereum. You can basically buy them, you can hold them, and that's about it. And the reason is because like transaction fees are just so high to do anything that you really want to do. I mean, funky interactions is just so expensive, and you can't really do a lot of those stuff on there. And I think the NFT standards as well, from a technology tech point of view, I think it's also limited, right? I think at ERC 721, there's also not a lot of added functionality. And so what we're seeing is that I think people who are interested in, I mean, I think two things, right? One is that we're seeing people who are more tech focused and more interested in the tech side of things start to experiment on some of the other layer ones. Like the one that has really fascinated me in the last couple of months is really Solana. Solana is probably the second largest NFT ecosystem today, but it's still probably like 4 times smaller than what Ethereum is right now. But just the types of potential functionality you can do with NFTs on Solana, I think is really interesting. For example, I think recently I came across this sort of like project that's called Backpack, and they have this like X NFT thing that allows like a piece of code to be embedded in the NFT itself.
Executable NFTs.
Exactly,
yeah, a lot of those
right?
guys are here with me in Chicago. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I think these guys are just really. I mean, to think of doing something like that. I don't know exactly what would be the best use case of something like that so far, but to me, like, as I think about it, it just opens my mind to so many different possibilities, right? And I think there are many of these other like advantages to being on some of these other sort of like layer ones around.
Yeah. Well, I'll raise one as an example, although
Okay.
it's a very biased example, right? Stashh started out, and we were dedicated solely to the secret ecosystem because we thought that getting native privacy into NFTs was super cool, and you just can't do it on ETH. All these chains that start public by default, we wanted to do things like private ownership, private metadata, exclusive content, exclusive access, being able to build out basically subscription products where it was all mediated by the blockchain itself, not by a centralized portal. right? Like we don't want Opensea or Dapper Labs saying whether you own the exclusive content or not. We wanted it embedded in the contract itself, the smart contract serving as an access control mechanism. So on secret, NFTs do have this dual role of both mediating ownership and mediating access. And that was a completely new design space as well. So that's a feature that we have native on Stashh that I don't think has been replicated in any other ecosystem. And it's definitely underexplored.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Like honestly, like privacy in NFTs is something that I have not thought a lot about. And I think like not many people are sort of like working on yet, at least like in the people I've interacted with. But I feel like there's a very strong use case for that. Like, I think like there's going to be like sometimes as I transact or use my NFTs, I sometimes think about like, I mean, there's no real way to sort of like preserve the privacy of it, right? When you have that, especially if you're using your NFT as a profile pic, when you want to do something with it, people are going to be tracking your wallets and
Right.
they know exactly what you're doing, what you're buying and selling. I feel like that's very limiting, honestly.
No, it absolutely is. And so a lot of that has to be solved, we think, by the layer one. Happy to have obviously a very long conversation about that. we know pretty much everybody who's been thinking about this, but I'm going to pass it back to MC because as much as we could talk about secret NFTs all day, there is one other chain you didn't mention that's been kind of hot lately. I know we wanted to ask about it.
Yeah. I think. Well, I mean, it's topical. And for all the maxis out there, some of them obviously don't like it because it's bastardizing initial, sort of use case. But BTC ordinals, you have a lot of people wondering, okay, is now all of a sudden, BTC going to be entering the NFT space, and it's sort of a divisive topic. But I'd love your thoughts on, is this just sort of like a hype play, or do you think it could turn into sort of a longer term thing?
Yeah, honestly, like I think like what's going on with Bitcoin NFTs, like the ordinals and stuff, like it really caught me by surprise. Like if I had to, think about like what would be things that would happen in like 2023, it was like probably never like there in my list at all. So I think it was real. Is to me, I think I've been pretty fascinated like what's going on with the ordinals space. Like I feel like as I was, I guess I did spend a bit of time like crawling all these different Discord groups and seeing like all these different like collections that people were sort of like inscribing and creating. There were a lot of like derivative collections. There were a lot of PFPs. There were a lot of like I would say like very early sort of like artworks that were there. And I really felt like I was transported like probably back like a couple of years, like on a different blockchain, because like there wasn't even, I mean, I probably up until a week ago there wasn't even a marketplace that you could buy and sell these NFTs on. You had to sort of like escrow it with someone else on the Discord group who you only know for a couple of hours, and he's holding your NFT that might be worth like tens of thousands of dollars. So it's really interesting. Like it feels like we're just being transported back so many years ago. But what that also means is that I think there is a lot of potential as well for this to develop into something real. And it also means that there's also a lot of opportunity for builders, for people who want to try stuff on the chain that hasn't really established like a market leader in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of which is the top PFP collection, in terms of who are the thought leaders in this space. That creates a lot of opportunity for people to start afresh, start anew. I think the biggest challenge I would see is that Bitcoin is just a very challenging chain to build something on. I mean, it doesn't have smart contract functionality inherently. So it just makes things very difficult. You need to go through a lot of hoops to start to do stuff. Like I think like Stacks is something that has been built on Bitcoin and brings some of that smart contract functionality, but still, yeah, I think there's still a very long way for Bitcoin ordinals to sort of like really take off. And it really comes down to, are people going to be able to build interesting, innovative things on the chain? Otherwise, I think what's going to happen is just that the Bitcoin ordinals are just going to be a very interesting piece of like historical artifacts. People who bought, say, the first 10,000 of these like inscriptions are probably, I think these could still hold value as a historical artifact, but there may not be a lot that you can really do with some of these things. So I'm a little bit divided, but I'm just curious to see where it all evolves.
It's interesting because we also watched this happen in the DeFi space, where you really didn't have any BTC in DeFi because it was so ETH denominated. All the early protocols, all the early primitives were all ETH based, and it was all with your ETH and then with your ERC20s and everything else that you were able to experiment with platforms like ETHLend, which became Aave, and things like that. That was the early utility. And then suddenly we had all of these competing platforms for bridging BTC as a native asset into DeFi with WBTC or RenBTC. And they all had these sort of different trust assumptions. So now we're in those early stages of ordinals, and we're seeing, again, some weird trust assumptions. Let's run everything off of a Google sheet in a Discord is a big trust assumption for supposedly trustless assets. But we did eventually see that BTC played a major role in the DeFi ecosystem because it was old money, because it was sort of that established digital gold. Here, because ordinals aren't exactly digital gold, they're the things you built on top of the digital gold. Maybe we're not going to see the same thing, but there's certainly some interesting halo effect to be from just being affiliated with the only chain with a longer and deeper history than Ethereum. Yeah, I think we're all waiting and seeing it. We're all watching to see what happens next.
Yeah, actually, and just to add to that thought, if anything, it in some ways undermines the BTC maxi case, because I think they were so hardcore about, BTC being the sort of the only, sound money, digital, what have you. Now all of a sudden we're validating sort of the digital asset class, outside of it, like so JPEGs, anything that's digital in natively, to have it being represented in some way, shape, or form already says, hey, there's a use case outside of Bitcoin. So it's kind of like it's sort of contradicting themselves, and especially the maxis. And I think that's why they're sort of caught in this sort of vortex loop. Okay, well, is it valuable or is it not valuable?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think part of me also thinks that I think the people who are sort of like very vocally against like NFTs on Bitcoin or anything that's non-financial on Bitcoin, I think these are also a very vocal minority of people. I think like most people who are in Bitcoin, they are fairly libertarian. Like they have this sort of like views that, as long as, the reason why Bitcoin is around is because it's basically a permissionless chain, it's censorship resistant, and basically the idea is that anyone, you can do what you want with your money, right? So I think the same thing should also apply to NFTs. Like if people want to inscribe their favorite pictures, they want to inscribe their memes on Bitcoin, it should really just let them sort of like do what they want. And I think like the people who are sort of like against it, I think they'll come around over time. And to me, I think it's just so nice to see like Bitcoin people actually have some fun with NFTs right now. I feel like they've been missing such a big part of the space, and probably what's going to be a very big part of crypto in the future.
Yeah, seeing them kind of interacting with these emotional products after kind of setting up all these purity tests for years for maximalism, and now suddenly the cognitive dissonance is kind of fun to watch. But there are some great people who are exploring it and giving a lot of people a fun time. So yeah, let's wait and see. I have not been loading into ordinals. I don't really like how I'd have to trade them, but now that there's a marketplace, let's see. Well, we're going into the last couple of questions we've got for you here, and they're both focused on the future. So putting your prognostication hat on, I know that's kind of professionally what you're supposed to do anyway. Let's talk about what might actually happen next. So we ask this question a lot for our guests because I think it puts them in a really interesting headspace. We want to know, what is the most controversial stance that you have on NFTs, one that you really believe, right? Not something you just say because you want to cause a stir, but like something you really believe about NFTs that you think the fewest number of people might agree with you on. Where do you feel like you're really standing against the crowd right now when it comes to your understanding of NFTs today and where they're going?
Okay, that's yeah, because I hang out a lot with the sort of like NFT crowd, so I feel like maybe some of the people I hang out with and my views also tend to be a little bit more biased. But I guess like if I were to say one thing is that I truly believe like at some point in the future, right? Um, digital items are going to be, or NFTs are going to be representing like almost everything that we have in the world. And it's not even just like digital items, like even physical items. You're talking about houses, we're talking about cars, we're talking about refrigerators, even like pets. I think there is going to be like NFTs going to be attached to all of these things. And the reason is because like it's just such a powerful and versatile technology that can be applied like at almost like zero cost, right? To mint an NFT, to transfer an NFT in the future on all these like either layer twos or newer blockchains, it doesn't cost anything. And it brings about a lot of like advantages, right? Because you are able to verify that something is authentic immediately. You can see where it was sort of like created. You can attach a lot of very useful metadata around some of these things. So I think that that's just going to be sort of like the future. I think for people who are not in NFTs and people who are, say, more focused on DeFi and have been sort of like watching NFTs from the outside and never participated in any of the like what's been going on, I think it's very easy for them to dismiss it as just like monkey pictures or altcoins with pictures, right? As a lot of them sort of like to say. And the truth is that I think even some of the things that are happening right now with Blur also sort of like proves that a little bit, that maybe like NFTs aren't as non-fungible as we think, and maybe they're closer to fungible tokens the way they're trading right now. But I think like in the future, we're going to see like we go see real use cases from it that really comes beyond just this sort of like speculative kind of use cases. I think it's very difficult to see right now because honestly, there hasn't been very much of a powerful use case that is already live right now. But I think like it will definitely come in time.
I have one reaction to this when you're saying it, because I don't disagree. It's just an interesting future to try to conceptualize, because we're already seeing what you can do with like financialization of, you know, altcoins with pictures. That's what Blur's doing. That's what a lot of these startups are doing. If everything in the world is going to become NFTized, pretty much anything in the world can become financialized to a degree that they might not have been already. And when you said pets, I was just like, are we going to see tranches of pets? And you can just buy not just dog coins, but literal tranches of dogs, and just you know, you're collateralizing the value of a dog. But universally, this concept of a dog, and maybe the value of a dog in Japan is different from the value of a collection of dogs in a different, like when we say everything and you start to really think about what everything could mean, not just like traditional financial assets, but literally anything you can stick an RFID tag or whatever, like that starts to feel really, I mean, so many things in the world feel really weird right now, but that feels really weird to me. Do you think this is like decades away, or are we already going to see people messing with this in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I think it's not like in the immediate future. That means like in the next 1 or 2 years, probably not. But I think it's going to happen faster than we think. And yeah, I really that stuff about pets I think is very interesting, right? Because I think we could see like different pets have different sort of like rarities and different traits, which makes a lot of sense. And I think why it seems like so natural to me is that the truth is that like right now in the world today, like almost everything that we have right now is actually non-fungible, right? Like I have like this t-shirt I'm wearing, right? It's very different from the t-shirt that somebody else is wearing. So it's already non-fungible. So what NFTs are doing is just attaching that digital component to all of that. So I think it's just when the infrastructure is there, when we live in a much more digital world where most of our lives are spent in the sort of like, I guess, metaverse for lack of a better word, then I think it just makes a lot of sense when that happens.
Yeah, I had my, it's funny, you know, I launched my own NFT project last year. And even in the midst of my own project, I had my NFT moment. And I think NFTs as an asset class are going to dwarf anything that we're talking about today. And I don't think people fully can wrap their head around it. The fact that we're going to basically take all the abstract things that exist now and put them on chain. So right now they only, whether it's IP, whether it's brands, what's all this stuff, and they're just going to unlock all that liquidity. And I think it's going to be a complete head fuck. And I don't think people have quite really given its due, because we you know what I mean? Our brains are catching up to that. And I think 6529, he's been one of these sort of at the cutting edge of this idea that everything will be financialized. And I think NFT is going to be that main vehicle.
Yeah.
Given, so that's our future. And I've really enjoyed going through a lot of your threads. I think you have some really sound and almost undeniable insights on what's coming down the road. In your opinion, given the short term, and especially now that we're sort of deep in a bear, we don't know how long the bear is going to be. But if you were to launch today an NFT related startup with the idea that you're going to be able to capitalize on whatever that next big trend is, and in crypto 6-9 months is a lifetime. If I wanted to start something today with the idea that I'm going to be riding that wave in 6 to 9 months from now, what would you recommend I do, or what kind of stuff?
Okay, yeah, no, I think it's just a bit. I think I caught the question, and I think what the first thing I would say is that probably I would not advise to start like a PFP collection. I feel like anyone who start, I think PFPs had their moment, and they came at a point in time where there was a confluence of factors. Like we were in a bull market. People were just starting to understand NFTs, but I think anyone's just trying to start a PFP collection today, I think you're just setting yourself up for failure, because it's just so difficult right now. I would say that the thing that I would be most interested in to sort of like start or advise someone to sort of like think about if they want to start an NFT company is really, I would say, how do you tools that actually help brands and corporates sort of like bridge the gap between the Web 2 and Web 3 world. I think I've seen interesting things like, say, people try to create, say, dynamic NFTs, where NFTs that are tied to, say, certain real world data, and they can change depending on certain actions that you can take. I think that's very interesting as a customer sort of engagement tool. But I think there's just so many more areas and so many more potential cool things that can be done with NFTs, that we just need to build that infrastructure that makes it easier for people who are not necessarily, say, like technically oriented or have big technical teams to actually be able to still participate in this whole sort of like space. I think right now, I think that's probably one of the big barriers that prevents a lot of more traditional sort of like brands from sort of like getting into the space, because it's something they don't understand, and if they want to do something in the space, they need to either outsource it to someone else to do it, or say hire their own in-house talent to sort of like build this out, which is very difficult. So I think like that infrastructure that helps big brands enter the space, to me, the market size for this is just huge. I think like in the future, all of these brands will have their Web3 presence, and if you can insert yourself somewhere in that space, wherever that niche could be, and what you're really good at, I think that that's going to be a very, very, very big market in the future.
That's a fun prediction, and I think it's going to be interesting to see, coming back full circle here, right? We started by talking about time horizons and how they shift in the bear and the bull. That multi-year mindset of what is it going to take over the next 5 to 10 years to get Coca-Cola into the metaverse fully, and really invested in these relationships with collectors. And then also, what do we do 3 months from now to just make sure the lights are still on, to make sure that the consumer interest is here, that we're educating people, and so on and so forth. So I think podcasts like this, our hope, right, is that we're getting people thinking about the big questions, but also getting them excited about what's here now. Hopefully they're inspired to go and check out some of the things that you've been talking about. Hopefully they're inspired to check out some of your writing, some of Delphi's research on the topic. I mean, you guys go super deep into this stuff. It's cool to see you guys continuing to have like an immediate perspective on what's hot now and where things are going, but also keeping that longer term vision of if the whole world is going digital, if every brand is going to be in the metaverse, if NFTs aren't going anywhere, then keeping our eye on the ball as a space, continuing to build and continuing to think about these issues. I'm really happy that people like you are continuing to lead the way there. That's my way of saying thank you for coming on the Collectours. We had a blast with you recording this episode. You are one of our early guests. There's a very good chance that somebody listening to this is listening in an NFT. So we're going to be releasing this podcast on Stashh as a secret NFT. Early minters will be able to see the episodes early. You will be able to watch it directly in the private metadata of your NFT. Or maybe you're watching this just on YouTube and you were late to the game. That's cool. But we're trying to, do this stuff ourselves, trying to dog food it. Thanks for being an early experimenter with us, Teng. We appreciate it. And as we sign off, where can people follow you and follow more of your work, more of your writing, more of your research?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you so much for having me on. And I had so much fun just chatting about all these different topics. And I mean, it's just never ceased to amaze me, like all the different things that's happening in the space. I feel like I can never get bored with this industry as a whole. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so that's probably the best place you can find me. My DMs are always open. I'm at 0x Prismatic on Twitter, so you can find me there. I do have a personal Substack as well. It's 0xprismatic at .substack.com. So if you're interested in my sort of like more personal writings outside of the work I do at Delphi, that's also somewhere you can find me.
Great. Well, we'll put all those links inside the episode. We'll make sure to share them with the whole Stashh community. But Teng, thank you again for making all this time, man. We really appreciate it.
It was pleasure was all mine, man. Like I just enjoyed that, and thank you so much for having me here, man.
Teng, thanks so much. Looking forward to our next chat, and I can definitely vouch for the Twitter because I found a lot of insights there. So everyone, make sure you go follow Teng.
Thank you, appreciate that so much.
Bye bye.